Hey everyone, I'm your host, Robbie Strazynski, and thanks so much for joining us on episode number 35 of CardsChat, the friendliest poker podcast in town. Our guest today is one of the premier mental game coaches, not just for poker, but he's also worked with clients in the sports, esports, and corporate worlds as well. In the poker world, he's written not one, but two of the premier books about off-the-felt preparation with The Mental Game of Poker, Volumes 1 and 2. Plus, he recently expanded his written repertoire to the financial world with The Mental Game of Trading. Jared Tendler, welcome to the CardsChat podcast.
Robbie, good to be here. And I suppose with your tagline of being the friendliest podcast in town, we've got the friendliest man in poker. So you've got the perfect host for the perfect podcast.
I appreciate that very much. It's funny, we were talking just before we went on air. I was like, you're familiar with CardsChat, right? And you told me something pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, CardsChats was my roots. So, when I started in poker in 2007, 2008, stocks poker was kind of where I started producing videos. But I had a thread on CardsChat and was, answering a lot of questions in the forum, and, certainly know Debbie well. And so, yeah, I mean, CardsChat's kind of bringing me back to my roots here.
Pretty cool. That's great, and we're really glad to have you on the show. So, okay, first of all, let's allay your fears. Don't worry, we'll talk about your new book. Buy the book, buy the book, buy the book. But we'll do that a little bit later in the show. I want to start off first with a mazel tov, a congratulations on that your first book, The Mental Game of Poker, it recently celebrated its 10th anniversary of its publication. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's kind of inauspicious timing because it's also Black Friday's anniversary. So here we go.
Exactly. And we know recently there was like a ton of stuff out, in poker media. We were commemorating, 10 years since then. You having put all of your focus and efforts into this new book, 10 years, it's still around, which is incredible. But and obviously serving the poker community well till today. But I'm curious, maybe you could kind of take this back to that time in your shoes, like, you're all excited, poker's like at its peak, and then all of a sudden Black Friday. What does that mean for you and getting out there with your first publication?
Yeah, it wasn't fun. We'll say that much. I'd say like on a personal level. So I had also, just kind of recently met my now wife, invested, a pretty substantial portion of my net worth into the actual production of the book.
Oh, right. Because I was still published, right?
Yeah, self-published. And I wanted to do it right. So, kind of getting the right people involved, isn't free. But I still, I think it was a very calculated bet. My break-even point was not crazy. Okay. So risk of ruin was not there. But we'd kind of finished up the book, had started a pre-sale on April 14th, 2010, or 2011, excuse me. Right. And, probably had sold 170 copies, the day before leading up. And I was actually on a client call between, I want to say like, noon and 1 o'clock, or like 11 a.m. and noon. Mm-hmm. And I got off and kind of, usually the first thing was go back to my email and just like see, the little dings of, sales coming through the website. And there were none. I was like, huh. Okay. So I go back onto Skype, and all of a sudden, like, I just see like, 40 messages of, the world is falling. So yeah, the heart drops into the floor, and, it's super stressful, for obvious reasons. And also, crazy, wasn't really sure what was going on. I will say that, I'll give Barry Carter, some props, because, I think I kind of falsely had this assumption. It was like, all right, like if you build it, they will come sort of mentality with the book. And so he kind of immediately came up with the strategy, like, we just need to sort of pivot and not worry about the book, and just kind of, help the poker community right now, and just lay it aside and not even worry about it. It was a smart decision. I think it kind of engendered a sense of community, helped me kind of, get more connected to the poker community, because I think at that point I still was fairly unknown. Mm-hmm. Stocks poker community knew me well, but I think beyond that it was still small. So yeah, I mean, we wrote this like massive blog post of trying to assail the fears of the poker community, and I think it helped a lot. And yeah, I think from there, things sort of eventually kind of reached some normalcy. And, by the end of the year, it was I think obviously a lot of people left poker, but enough remained,
Right.
and there was enough clarity as to what was happening that, future
Wow.
was not so bleak.
What a journey. I mean, you mentioned Barry Carter is a good friend of mine as well as the editor of pokerstrategy.com. He was the co-writer of your book, or the what the official title is.
Yeah, he was like my ghostwriter / assistant writer. Like basically,
Okay.
I'm not good at just sitting down with a blank piece of paper. So I
Mhm.
would do dictation. He would kind of write it back. We'd kind of go back and forth until it was like structurally in a spot where I could kind of edit it. So, and then
Mhm.
also he was the eyes and ears of the poker world to make sure that I
Right.
was saying things that were relevant and didn't sound too off.
Right. So that's an interesting point also. I'm curious kind of like how you got hooked up with him to begin with, because you were not exactly coming from within the community. You're coming from, from the golf world a little bit.
And it's not like he was my neighbor either,
Right. Right.
yeah, some, out in Sheffield, England, and I'm, at that time in New York City. No, so he and I got hooked up. I want to say it was 2008, 2009. He had just contacted me, working for Poker News UK. Wanted to do a series of articles, basically kind of becoming a client. So, if you know Barry well, he's always looking for free stuff, and he wanted some free coaching. So here we go. And so, we got along well. I think, he kind of immediately understood the value of the coaching. He just kind of got it. And at that time, I'm not sure that I started writing the book, but I was at least kind of beginning the process of it. And after about 6 months of just kind of going around in circles, I just reached out to him. I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And, would you be up for writing a book together? And yeah, I don't remember his answer. I don't remember the conversation. I just, but he must have said yes. So
Interesting. Okay. Well, we said, like, it's been 10 years and, you're still known for these books because they basically stand the test of time. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I mean, the nice part about like the mental game or psychology, as as you compare it to like strategy books, is there's not as much evolution to it, right? I know we'll get to it, but the trading book certainly is an evolution just because I know more. But
Right.
in terms of the material itself, yeah, I mean, I think a big part of what the value that I provide to my clients, and I think is evident in the books, is like a system or a method, a strategy for the mental game. And that's why I like the term mental game, right? Because it implies something that can't be solved. I know we're, poker's kind of verging in that direction in a lot of degrees, but like, the complexity of our own minds is not something that you're going to have permanently forever. That's why I don't like the term mindset. It's like a subtle difference, but so yeah, if and I think the ethos of the book is really about, kind of giving people the tools to fish. Like, I'm not just handing you fish, I'm
Right.
teaching you how to fish, and I think that's a big part of it. It's how do you think, and how do you understand how to like kind of problem solve for yourself. When I first started creating these videos for Stocks Poker in 2008, I'm not exaggerating. I spent probably 600 hours trying to produce 4 to 4.5 hours of actual material.
Wow.
And the main reason for that is because I went around and around trying to figure out how the heck I was going to communicate to a group of people who have massive built-in bullshit detectors, right? I'm not going to be able to just like pull one over them. I can't just spout my normal, BS and have it land. So what I realized was that I needed to actually communicate a system and a strategy. And so what happened was, this is like going through that video series was the beginnings of the book. It was me starting to articulate in practical terms how I work with a client, not just here's advice, but how you actually problem solve. And what happened is, it was the beginning of my system and understanding some of the mechanics and the concepts that were key to that, right? And the people that know the book would be, it's like, we're talking about the adult learning model. We're talking about the concept of inchworm.
Yep.
We're talking about, injecting logic and resolution and, this malfunctioning mind where the emotions shut down higher brain function. So there's like, the beginnings of that foundation was formed, in trying to produce these videos
Interesting.
that had that ethic of, okay, listen, I don't know this industry well enough. So here, you know what? I'm going to teach you how to help yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what the book ends up kind of communicating, is a sense of like, okay, here's the problem I'm having and here's how I go about fixing it. Not just like a piece of advice that you just like, there's no quick tips in there. That's the difference.
Correct. Right. It's a whole methodology. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned inchworm. That was, that actually leads into my next question. That's the one that really, really stuck with me all of these years since I've read the book. And I've found that it doesn't just reflect poker learning, but life learning. And I'll be very frank as well. This is something I even remember relating to my kids in grade school, of this concept of, okay, why do you need to know multiplication and division? Because later on, you're going to need to know more. And that stuff's easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that, and again, this is meant for the poker community, the mental game of poker, but did you find that you were getting that sort of feedback from people, that it's sort of helping them well beyond poker as well, as far as improving their lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both poker players who were then doing maybe similar things as you were, bring it to their kids or bring it to their, their jobs, if they were, like a part-time pro, or maybe they were applying it to their goals with fitness or nutrition, kind of understanding that, there were going to be bad days, but if those bad days were systematically like less bad, that is still progress, right? It's kind of an apples to apples, like my worst is getting better. And that's helpful to kind of understand. So yeah. And then of course, traders started picking up the book, esport athletes started picking up the book.
Yeah.
I've worked with a radiologist at this point. So there's,
Oh, wow.
kind of lots of different people, sports bettors, not surprisingly.
Uh-huh.
But, I appreciate that because, I will say this publicly. It's not, for massive public consumption, but my plan is to write like an inchworm book and kind of blow the concept out to more of a mass market audience. I think it's
nice.
There's a very popular book called Mindsets by Carol Dweck. And here I was railing against the term, but the book is great because what it describes is the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And fixed mindseted type people tend to view intelligence as either, kind of like either you have it or you don't, or talent is either you have it or you don't. They don't necessarily kind of focus as much on the growth of the learning process. So they will have, a harder time when they make mistakes. They'll have a harder time when they lose. And certainly I've worked with a lot of people who have put in that category. But the thing is about her book, she's a researcher, she's an academic type, and the book sort of falls short in terms of practicality. And I feel like inchworm is kind of the way that you can take kind of the brilliance of her work and turn it into something that's a bit more practical to adults, right? Now, for kids, you teach them growth mindset as a kid. They don't ever develop the bad habits that, you and I did. Mm-hmm. So it's a great thing. And I've seen, my niece and nephew, they're getting taught growth mindset, from a young age, which is amazing. For the rest of us, I think inchworm is the answer. So
cool. Well, not for public consumption, but you guys heard the scoop here first on the CardsChat podcast. So we got that. So I have to ask, Jared, we talked about you hooking up with Barry and, you're writing this book for the poker community, but you didn't come from the poker world. You come from the golf world. And I'm kind of wondering, like, what is it that sort of like, you said to yourself, okay, you know what, maybe there's like, I don't know, this similarity. Let's get into poker. It's booming. And at the time it was, we all know golf is a game where, you see the professionals on the green, really the mental game is so critical where they've got to make that putt worth millions of dollars. Is that sort of a similarity you saw, or it just happened into it? Or, you always were like a home game shark and really wanted to do something, book wise for the community?
Yeah, no. I mean, I had poker was not on my radar really until I met Dusty Schmidt, Leatherass.
Right.
And, he was sort of my entry point into the poker world. So he was at that time, I think it was the first year was like Supernova Elite was a thing, right? And trying to make that kind of year-long rake race. And basically because he was trying to play so much poker, and he was also actually trying to do it in 10 months instead of 12.
Okay.
But he was having so much tilt that he was literally like ripping his desktop computer out of the wall, smashing
wow.
it, breaking mice, breaking monitors. I mean, he paid for our sessions just in the savings of computer equipment within the first month. So, he and I mean, at that point, he was making around $20,000 to $30,000 a month. And in the 4 months after he and I started working, he made $600K. Now, of course, there's some variance involved, right? I'm not going to take, but the bigger outcomes, and this is where the work real is, that he was able to play that much more poker. He was able to actually still get Supernova Elite in 10 months. The tilt was relatively gone, or if it did show up, it was at such a low manageable level that it didn't affect his play, or at least not, too discernibly, and it didn't affect his volume. So, that was through the end of 2007. And then
So you knew him through the golf world? I remember he used to be a golfer. Is that
that's right? Yeah. So he was, I think, at like 19. I want to say he led like the Golden State Tour in terms of like money. He was, his aspirations were like mine, which was to play professional golf. He got derailed for health reasons. I got derailed because of my own mental game. But so he knew golf really well. We actually met at a kind of like a mutual golf trip. There's like 12 guys, some coming from Portland where he lived, some coming from Arizona and California, and just kind of randomly met. So after the success that he had, given his relationship with Stocks Poker, he kind of made the introduction, and this was like at this point kind of the beginnings of the online training kind of platforms that were popping up. And so, I was kind of like the first one to start producing content, and on one of those platforms. And I think because of my expertise in the psychology world, it was probably an easier transition, even though it was difficult to get a skeptical audience, to buy into the value of the mental game, period, let alone from somebody who, I played poker. I mean, it's not like I don't know. I wasn't like, Maria Konnikova, who didn't even know that there were 52 cards in a deck when she first was introduced to the game. I mean, I played, AC Deucey and Setback and, lots of games growing up as a kid, but I did that while it was between golf rounds. Like we played 18 holes in the morning, gamble for, nickels and dimes during lunch, and then go play another 18. So that was my origin story here.
Interesting. Do you still play a little bit of poker? Is that part of your weekly or monthly repertoire?
I wouldn't say in this day and age, given the COVID world. But when the problem is most of my friends don't let me play anymore.
Because you're too good?
They think I'm too good. I mean, they're so bad. They don't know that I'm bad also. I mean, I know. I mean, listen, I know. The problem is it's like, somebody who watches like the business channel all day and thinks they know how to stock pick. You become, enough to be dangerous. And I know enough to be dangerous to myself, not to others. Yeah.
So it's always mostly the home games. Do you dabble in tournaments here and there, near where you live, or you go out to the World Series to play once in a while?
No.
Okay.
I mean, the problem is I know too much. I mean, I know how good the people are. Now, I would go for entertainment if I was going with my friends and we were going to go and have some fun with it. Sure. But I mean, I'm not plus EV in any of these things that I would enter in. So I'm going there. I would go there for the fun of it. And, especially now with a young family,
sure.
It becomes hard to rationalize. And the other thing is like, if I'm going to spend my personal time, it's usually going to be on the golf course, right? Where I can, go do what I do best.
Nice.
So, that it's just like a kind of a question of like, where do I put my time? Right. And for the most part, other than when I first got in, I definitely played some online poker, back in 2008, 2009, to really kind of understand the world and, get a bit more educated on the lingo and what we were talking about here. But I mean, I basically spent my time getting better at my job, right? Getting better as a coach. And that's what I love.
Right.
So I still like poker, but
that's what I always tell my wife, Mary. I mean, every time I want to go to Las Vegas, I need to do research. Right. That's exactly what it's all about.
Yes. And there's no other way to get it.
Right. Exactly. All right. So, not only, is your wisdom available through your books, but you've also had quite a lot of amazing testimonials over the years. Only those who've sort of made it public. Obviously, client confidentiality is so supremely important, but there have been a number of high profile successes. You want to care to name drop a little bit?
Well, I mean, the fun ones were that two of my existing clients made it to the main event final table in successive years, with Jorrit van Hoof and Max Steinberg in 2014 and 15, respectively.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did coach another one the following year, but he kind of came to me afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had a number of World Series of Poker bracelet winners, obviously. You know, Kristen Bicknell has name dropped a few times.
Uh-huh.
Who else? Yeah, I think those are kind of the big ones that I would feel
Okay.
comfortable. I think there's probably a few other testimonials still on my website, but
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Is there some sort of like a common thread that you find that you end up working with for these super high profile players, or it's each person really it's kind of like tailored to their particular issues they need to work on?
Yeah, it's very much tailored. I mean, I think
Hmm.
there are common traits among them in terms of their work ethic, in terms of their motivation and desire to excel and to be the best. Um, you know, their aspirations are massive. Their talent is massive. Um, so yeah, I think those traits are similar, but then like the what they need is different. I think one common thing, if that's been happening, has been, you know, a number of them uh, were just like kind of running bad
Hmm.
or just like struggling to break through.
Mhm.
So yeah, there are a few names that I can't name, but who, you know, for a couple of years, like believed that they were, you know, top five and just like kind of weren't there because they just weren't either getting the cards or they felt like there was something off in their mentality and just, so yeah, we were kind of just like kind of grinding through all that and figuring out. But some in some instances, I do feel like it was just helping them to deal with the bad run. It wasn't that they needed to get that much better. It was just they just hadn't had their opportunity to, you know, get the cards at the right time, and they needed to be patient and continue to, you know, stay the course, so to speak. You know, because sometimes
Interesting.
it's easy to start to think you need to do all, like things dramatically different. You know, and this is another reason why inchworm is such an important concept at any level, right? You know, I think sometimes people, when they're in a period where they're running bad or they're struggling, they start to try to change too much and they kind of lose sight of the foundation of their own game. And that leads them down in a direction where even if they find, you know, like a valuable strategy, if it starts to go badly, right? So, you know, this new thing starts to work, but then if it starts to go badly, you're going to feel more lost than you did when you first. So to
Hmm.
me, the organic growth where you're always like at least eliminating the things that you know are fundamentally off in your game. And then on the front end of the inchworm, right, if you want to be adding, you know, different lines or different ways of thinking, by all
Hmm.
means do that. But you can't lose sight of your base in terms of how you play. Otherwise, you're going to be going through, and you need to understand what you're going through, a massive rebuild, which is going to be more like what Tiger Woods experienced in 2002, 3, where
Hmm.
he completely rebuilt his golf swing.
Right.
And it took him 2 full years
Hmm.
to get to the point where this new golf swing could be tested under major championship pressure without having to think about it.
Hmm.
Right. So if you're going to do a rebuild of your game, just be prepared for what you're actually doing. But for the most part, you know, most people, what they need is more of this sort of organic growth where, yes, of course they're developing and improving, but they're doing so, you know, from a base of their own competency, not by saying, oh, like my game is just garbage, let's scrap it and start fresh.
It's so funny because like part of me, as the host, I'm trying to like listen to the answer and go along with the cadence of the show. But part of me is also like, I want to learn from this. I want to remember. I kind of want to take notes, because like look, I'm not no professional
You want a
player, but like
session? I get it.
this, yeah. But like look, like you said, Barry, we love free stuff. But you know what?
Yeah.
It's these are pearls of wisdom, and it's funny. Like on a poker level, what you're talking about with Tiger Woods, it kind of reminds me of this period of time. I guess it was 3, 4 years ago. One of the biggest names in the world, Daniel Negreanu, right, where he had played for 20 years this exploitative approach that had obviously served him pretty darn well. And then he goes and you see this new generation, the GTO high roller guys, and for whatever reason, it wasn't working. So he had to go ahead and, in a sense, sort of also retool his game, hired his coaches, that sort of a thing, and till he wrapped his head around the GTO concept and now can integrate it. But it's certainly it's a similar type of situation to what you've mentioned. It just finds very interesting.
You have a sense
Um,
as to how long it took him to get through that?
I think it was till he believed, I think when he was, he's very public about everything. I think he said it took him like fully at least 6 months. But you're talking 6 months where like that's all he did was working on this game.
Yeah.
And it's no like physical things you need to do, I guess, except like the one finger check. That's very important apparently. Well, one of the things that has happened, and we've talked about this with a number of our guests, over the last 30. This is episode 35, so 34, episodes. The game of poker has gotten so much tougher. Partially, in a main reason actually, is because people are putting so much time towards study. And we all know, back in the day, they used to be just super system and that's it. Nowadays, you've got your choice. There's so many poker training sites out there that people like, choosing from, different fits for different people. In the, sort of the same way, there's a little bit of a healthy competition these days among mental game coaches in the poker space. What would you say that, Jared Tendler does differently or offers methodologically than other mental game coaches out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes back to the system piece. Like there's a difference between getting good advice on how to deal with certain situations, and then being able to actually like learn a system that you can then use to solve your own issues. At the end of the day, when you're sitting at the table, you can't phone a friend, right? You're not going to phone your mental game coach, right? You have to be able to be ready to make the decisions and to be able to manage through the issues, kind of on your own. And I'm not saying that other mental game coaches aren't preparing their players for that too. I'm just saying that my system is designed, I think, from the beginning to be able for you to be the one kind of in firm control. It's a challenge, I think, to be able to like work the process like that. But if you're willing to put the work in, the outcome I think is much greater. The other thing is that the system is designed to achieve resolution. And what resolution means is that you are actually solving the issue at its core, right? And when I say issue, right, we're talking about tilt, we're talking about fear, we're talking about confidence issues. Those are just like symptoms or signals of the problem, right? They're not the actual problem. The actual problem are these underlying performance flaws, right? High expectations, illusions of control, hatred of variance, hatred of mistakes. These types of flaws are what produce that emotional volatility. And so we're not trying to control or suppress those emotions, right? You are in the short term, right? So you can continue to play well. But in the long term, you want those things gone, because if you are managing your mental issues or your emotional issues, you are consuming mental resources to try to control and suppress those impulses, which means that you now have less bandwidth to actually pay attention to the action, to learn what your opponents are doing, to understand, the ways in which they're playing or tells that they may be giving off, whether that be timing tells on, online. So resolution is such a key idea and concept because of those big moments where it matters most. And that was all born out of my own failure as a golfer in those key moments, right? I tried to play professional golf, but the sports psychology that was available to me at the time was much more about management and control. Right. And so it helped. I got better, at 95% of the time, except in those key moments where I would fail. And, whether you're playing in a cash game, whether you're playing in tournaments, it's those big moments that have the biggest impact, right? Especially as a tournament player, you're going to make 80% of your money from 20% of the events. And those are just the ones that you cash, right? So, when you have the opportunity to really level up, you cannot rely on anybody else but yourself. And you do not want to have to be battling yourself at the same time that you're battling your opponents.
Yeah, I can actually attest to that. I hope you're okay with this, but I'm going to reveal something very, very personal that, I still remember to this day. You were kind enough to take a very short phone call from me many years ago, back when I was, I want to say either going to or leaving Atlantic City, New Jersey, just on one of my trips from Israel. It's always a long haul. You can't just drive over. And I still remember it wasn't like with the playing itself, but it was an issue of, wanting to play so badly and wanting to succeed. And you were, you had given me a really great piece of advice and asking me, but why, and like you kind of like, it just attests to what you said. It gave me the tools to resolve this in my own mind of, well, if the point is just to enjoy and have fun, then focus on enjoying and having fun, not whether you win or lose necessarily. And it sounds so simple, but it really is the truth. And I do want to thank you very publicly for giving me that piece of advice. It was a good one.
Yeah, you're
Um,
welcome. But
Thank you.
it sort of proves the point, right? Like
Yeah.
you just had sort of like mixed motivations.
Yeah.
And that sometimes these issues are easy to solve once you kind of get them in the light of day,
Hmm.
and for a lot of people, if they don't have a process for doing that, then they end up kind of like with too much kind of noise in their mind, and that noise, especially under the bright lights of actually having to make decisions where your money and your future and your goals are on the line, they cause pain points, and those pain points turn into fear or anger or confidence issues.
Absolutely. What are some of the stranger issues that players have approached you with over the years?
Oh man, that's a good question. Well, I guess what I would say is that the trajectory that has gone, I'd say probably since 2015.
Mhm.
I feel like the poker players with the sort of prototypical tilt issues, I feel like they stopped kind of coming to me for coaching because they would read the book and that would kind of take care of it. The people that sort of showed up at my door were the ones that had more complex issues, and a lot of times there was some kind of personal component to it. Like kind of as we dug into it, there were kind of unresolved issues from their previous, like, let's say, academic life, or from sporting life, like kind of these hangovers of like a hatred of losing,
Mhm.
that started when they were playing baseball, or started when they would underperform in school,
Mhm.
or the opposite, where they were underperforming in school and they didn't understand why they couldn't kind of get the motivation, or to stop these procrastination issues. And it turned out that, well, they've actually been practicing them for a decade.
Wow.
So yeah, I'd say less, than sort of strange in that regard, more of just sort of, kind of going back to a little bit of my training as a traditional therapist, never with the intent to practice, but what it ended up doing was like kind of becoming this like kind of intersection between these personal issues and how they would show up in poker.
Sure.
So you take somebody with, um, I mean, this is not the most common example, right? But had one client who, was bullied as a kid.
Mm.
And so, playing poker, and now all of a sudden he's dealing with situations where,
Mm.
you have aggressive re-raising,
Right.
and would kind of alternate between like kind of cowering to it and then wanting to just like
Stand up
shove
to
over
it.
the top
Yeah.
and fight back. And it just became, sort of like poker sort of became like an
Wow.
exercise of like trying to work through that issue. So we sort of dealt with it on a personal level, and then needed to kind of weave in those corrections so that he, firmly understood that the person who was, being aggressive towards him was not personal. It was, that distinct from himself on a personal level, and was just about him as a poker player. And being, weak in certain ways as a poker player, right, is a fundamental reality. And embracing that and understanding that, became part of kind of the reconciliation process for him on a personal level and a poker level. So here was like a kind of a beautiful example where
Right.
like he was truly kind of cross training and like being able to, resolve these deeper issues, through the game, which I think is super cool. When you
Yeah.
can, have poker be something that, helps you on a personal level, it's pretty special.
Sure. It's definitely fascinating. I'm sure it must make you feel good also that you're reaching a little bit beyond just helping him add more chips to his stack. So that's pretty
Absolutely.
cool. Here's kind of like a two-parter. What would you say has been sort of like the most difficult issue or something like that that you've had to help a client overcome? And the second part of that, perhaps, when it gets a little bit too personal, you kind of maybe you say to yourself, maybe I'm not the right person to assist you, and you have to kind of refer them forward to, I'm not more of an expert, but an expert sort of in a more personal behavioral psychology, type of field or something. Has that ever happened, or has there been like a truly tough case?
I mean, so the last case that I think was like, for me, unsolvable, is about actually around the time that the book came out. And it's not about, it wasn't about the book. It was more about, it being that far ago. And that's not to say that I think I've, every person that has come to me has had, amazing, tremendous success. I just think the people that have invariably come to me, it's been sort of a self-selection bias, have read the material and kind of understand implicitly like what value I provide. So, there was sort of a kind of simpatico thing going on from the beginning. But within the people that were in that spectrum and that had deeper issues, I've referred lots of clients to therapists and kind of looked at that as a bit of a value added. I mean, there are certain things that I could do but don't want to, and there are certain things that others are true like trauma specialists, right? I mean, I am trained in certain trauma therapies and have kind of integrated them in a more like kind of performance-based way. For some people, because here's a kind of a poker version of trauma would be like, you are, bubbling the final table of a massive event. You make a massive mistake, with 4 left, and you were chip leader, and then, all of a sudden, then you go out in 4th, right? There are some big situations that poker players have been through that are scarring, and they stick with you. Days where, you have this like kind of massive desperation tilt, right? And you blow 70% of your bankroll and now kind of struggling in what you're going to do.
Sore spot, Jared. Sore spot.
But so the thing is like, these things can be scarring. And when I say scarring, what that means is that then your mentality is affected, kind of onto the future. So the poker traumas I can deal with. The personal traumas, I refer out and listen, it happens. I think there's a lot of people out there who, I'll give you like a very kind of quick way to recognize whether you have poker or personal trauma, because I think it's an important one for people to know about. Okay, memory is supposed to be stored in a very kind of pragmatic, non-emotional way over the long term. Okay, so you might have a memory. Okay, so I'll give the example that I use with my clients. Okay, I'm 12 years old. I was a big tennis player back then too, and I had a gorgeous Agassi mullet. Okay, short on the side, spike in the front, and then just party in the back.
Yep.
But for my father, that was not the most appropriate haircut, prior to your bar mitzvah.
Sure.
So he, kind of forced me to get a haircut, and for me, that was traumatizing, right? Like, and so my point is that I knew it was a marker for trauma, because in my early 20s, when I would think back to that, I would get emotional, right? I would feel the same kind of pain. It's not, that a memory is resolved if you think back to it and you can remember how you felt, but you don't actually feel it now, right? So you think about,
Sure.
That big poker mistake that you made, or a big fold, right? You make this, what you think is a massive fold, and you get shown a bluff, and the pain of that just sticks with you, right? So years later, you still think about that and you feel the same pain that you did in that moment. Right. That is a marker for trauma, big or small, right? But if you remember it and you remember it sucking, or, you remember celebrating, whatever, but you don't actually feel it, then that situation has been kind of firmly moved on and resolved from. So big or small, that stuff can affect you.
Yeah. Well, unlike Mr. Agassi, you are not follically challenged at this stage of your life, so more power to you.
That was a big revelation in his book.
There you go. There you go. I imagine, when you have a book which is meant for, sort of the mass market, at a pricing point for recreational players as well, one-on-one coaching services is not necessarily something that your typical recreational player would engage in. That's my assumption. I don't like assuming, but would it be fair to say that the overwhelming majority of people who approach you are professionals? And then do you ever get approached by recreationals?
Yes and yes. So overwhelming majority are professionals, but yeah, I still work with some recreational players, but I do make some kind of several, kind of asterisks on that. They have to either, like their goal is either that they're profitable in the games that they play in, right? They don't have to play all the time, but I don't want people to ever think that like the mental game is a solution to just being bad at poker, right? And I don't want that delusion to kind of live on, and it's, the same. I don't know that I make it super clear in the poker book, but I definitely make it very clear in the trading book, that this book is designed for people who either have an edge or know that their strategy or system is such that, if their mental game issues were solved, that they would have one.
Got it.
Because I think sometimes, and it's true in golf too, right? The importance of the mental game is sort of overplayed at times. And you know, there's a reason the Dalai Lama is not a good golfer, okay? Because you need to have skills, right? You can't have, you know, your mind be the thing that is. So it's not entirely a mental game.
Okay.
Now that's one. Two, the other thing is that I try to link their improvement to something outside of poker. So, you know, I work with, you know, a lawyer or a doctor or, you know, some sort of professional, and we just sort of like look at the parallels between, because what is very, very true for recreational players is that the issues that they experience within poker, I mean, with very, very high frequency, they also exist somewhere else in their lives.
Right.
Right. Poker players who are professionals that have played the game for years, they have kind of weeded out the influence of their personal lives for the most part in the game. And that's not to say it's exclusive, but by and large, the performance issues that are discussed in the book take care of a vast majority of the performance-based problems that exist when they go play. That's not the case for recreational players because they haven't played enough, right?
Okay.
They haven't been able to have their strategy provide buffer against that. So you sort of see this parallel between the two. And yeah, to me, that kind of cross training is really what is exciting and intriguing to me, and then makes it such that if you continue to suck as a poker player, you know, then it's fine if you're also improving your life. I'm willing to do that kind of work. I'm not willing to make people delusional. And I've actually, you know, stopped working with a couple who I was like, you are, you know, there's one in particular who wanted to be a professional, and he just was not. I mean, it wasn't like I was assessing his poker competence.
Sure.
But the way he was talking, it was very clear that this was not a guy that was going to do right by his family to make it a go as a professional poker player.
Wow.
Unfortunately, he heeded my advice and, you know, went back to his job.
Good for you.
So
it's important to give the good life advice as well. And you clearly work, you know, with poker players, with golfers, still with esports, doctors, lawyers, you know, people from all sort of strata. Are there any sort of, you know, we always say, you know, you got to change gears a lot in poker depending on who you're facing at the felt. Do you kind of have to like make certain types of adjustments depending on the type of professional who is seeking your advice?
Necessarily. I mean, I think if the adjustment generally just kind of comes from how does this person kind of tick and how much can I push them? Right. The more serious the player is, and this is true with you know, I've got a couple PGA Tour players. I can't name the names, but one is a guy that wants to be one of the best in the world. The other is one that wants to be really good. Right. And there's just like a different level with which I can push based on their goals. And that's the same, you know, with certain poker players, right. With different walks of life. So it's more of the like, how well do I understand what they want and need from me? Because if I give them sort of advice that is a bit too big for their aspirations,
Right.
they're just not going to get there. Right.
Sure.
So for me, it is inchworm methodology. What's going to allow them to take the next step? And that next step is different based on what your goals are.
I love it. All right. Well, you've made it through the gauntlet. It's time to promote the mental book of trading. What was your inspiration to write a new book specifically in this niche?
So for those that know my second book, there's a concept called bloated brain. And bloated brain is when you're sort of just consuming so much information that it actually prevents you from being in the zone and prevents you from performing at a high level or from continuing to learn at a high level. So one of my motivations was to alleviate my own bloated brain, because at the time I started working on the book had been 7 years, I guess technically 6 years from the beginning. 7 years from writing the first book. But, you know, the first book and the second book were kind of written, you know, very close together. So
kind of like the Marvel
it had been
series,
a long time since I had written and,
right.
and just like, I am constantly learning and absorbing a ton of information. And I just hadn't, like, I need to consolidate and crystallize that information into some sort of usable content.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it took me 3 years to work through all of it. Part of that was just timing, but you know, there was just so much material that I had to kind of wade through. So that was one motivation. The other was, you know, the interest in kind of just moving into a new market. And, you know, the trading world is massive. There were a lot of traders that had, you know, picked up the poker book and just said, hey, change the word poker to trading, you've got yourself a book. And I was like, well, that seems like cheating. So I'm not going to do that. And so then, I had to kind of do a similar, kind of diving into, and I also, I'd worked with, traders started coming up as clients. I started working with some institutional, firms that were, had a desk of, 40 traders, things of that sort. So I knew that the poker based content and material and system that was honed there, applied in trading, just kind of given some adjustments. So, that was a big motivation. I'd say, the outcome has been that my system has become more systematized, right? So what started with the poker book has now kind of gone to another level. It's not to say that, the material in the poker book is outdated. All of it is still very relevant. What exists now in the trading book is just, kind of every problem is sort of described in more detail.
Okay.
The system has a more sort of formulaic flow to it. I think, the poker book, listen, my intent was to make you feel like you were a client. You would feel more like a client with this one. You'll feel like you get more content. The process of getting to resolution is made more efficient, dealing with more of the trouble spots, because now I've had roughly 10 years of experience helping people kind of work through and troubleshoot those problems of like what typically happens. I mean, I'd say the funniest one is, you take a person with high expectations, they may become very clear about what their strategy is for correcting their high expectations. But what I found early on was that they actually needed to use that for their learning process, right? Because they would have very high expectations for how quickly they were going to correct their high expectations.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So, it's just
sense.
like subtle stuff like that, just kind of makes the improvement or learning process a bit more efficient. So all that content was kind of crystallized.
Gotcha. Who would you say is the main target audience for this book? Is it, bunches of folks on Wall Street, or is it also just, you're someone like me who's got a, couple $100 on Ameritrade?
Yeah. I mean, so you would be kind of the trading fish, right?
Right.
There's a difference between investors and traders. So traders are much more like the poker players. Investors still have emotional issues in their own right. But the difficulty is like, how do you know that what you're experiencing is a true kind of mental game issue? And how much is it just a function of your inexperience? Because there's, so in poker, tilt was like kind of the big theme and topic. In trading, fear is almost the thing that's sort of equal to that, where everybody thought, oh, well, you've got, anything less than playing your best is tilt in poker. And it's like greed and fear are kind of the two big terms in trading. But, I start the fear chapter with the story of a client who very, very quickly, he solved all of his fear issues by realizing that for him right now, he just wasn't that good.
Okay.
Right. That the hesitation and the risk aversion and the second guessing that he would experience at the time that he had to make a trading decision was due to the fact that he had all of these unanswered questions, and his strategy was just not tight enough. So for him, trading was actually 90% technical and 10% mental at that particular time. And that is what helped him get over the hump. So if you're a retail investor who's not really making a lot of trading decisions very frequently, you don't really have a robust strategy. So you're not really you don't have the ability to kind of firmly gauge whether what you're experiencing is truly a mental game issue or whether it's a signal of a lack of a strategy altogether.
Okay.
So I'd say, in large measure, the book is designed to help, people who are either actively investing, actively trading, have a strategy, have some kind of, system that they're using so that they can, work their way through it. I mean, anybody beyond that is going to be somebody who's going to still need to improve their mental game in some way. I mean, listen, I do think poker players will benefit if you like the first poker book and you want, kind of updated content, cool. If you never read the first poker book, maybe you get both. Although, I mean, I don't know, that might be a lot to ask, but anyway, the point is like, you need to have some kind of a performance arena where you're going to take the material and apply it, where that you're good enough in order to gauge whether it's because you suck or whether your mental game is really the thing that's holding you back.
Well, like a good chess player, you predicted my next move because that was going to be my question. So I will move on to my last question before we get into the community questions for you, Jared. In poker, everyone loves to tell bad beat stories, but no one really has the patience to hear them. I imagine that you may probably hear more than your fair share of bad beat or bad beat like stories from your clients. Has there ever been anything that one of your clients has told you that kind of like throws you off your professional balance and kind of just makes you like laugh out loud, or like this is what they're complaining about, or something like that?
It's funny. I've learned the art of tuning them out. Um,
Hmm.
so when somebody starts telling me a bad beat story, I either will stop them, or I
Oh.
will pay attention to the one or two key things that I need to know. So some clients I can cut off, easily. Others, they need to kind of get their crazy out in order for me to be able to have an impact. So once I get those like one or two nuggets, I'll kind of just like go into like another world for like 5 minutes. And then once they stop talking, then I will just sort of, fire that bullet and off we go. So no, I don't remember any of them. And that's on purpose.
Well, that was a very professionally handled question, and I mean that in the most genuine way possible. We have now moved on to the segment of our show where we turn to you guys, our Cards Chat community, to see what questions you wanted to ask our guests. We have a dedicated thread on the Cards Chat forums where we announce who the next guest will be, giving you guys the opportunity to send in your questions. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. Debbie always lets you know, okay, there's going to be another guest, and Jared's coming on. Send in your questions. So first off, thanks to Freddie DR87 for sending in this good one. Freddie asks, what can I do to avoid tilt? I'm able to identify it, but I can't handle it.
So we're talking short term, long term. Okay. If you're going to avoid tilt, you need to know not just like when it shows up and recognize the signals of it. You need to know why it's happening, right? Is it due to a run bad, right? Or is tilt happening in periods where you're just getting high concentration of bad luck and struggling to deal with that? Is it due to your hatred of losing? Is it due to a sense of injustice? Is it due to your own mistakes? Is it due to your opponents putting you on, in very difficult spots and turns into some revenge? Do you have the classic Phil Hellmuth entitlement tilt, right? What is the cause of it, right? And so that next layer of questioning, which Robbie and I spoke about earlier, just asking that question, why? Okay, in those key moments, you can start asking yourself, why am I pissed off? And then from there, you get an answer. In the poker and the trading book, I use a tool called the mental hand history. The mental hand history is sort of my kind of poker equivalent to reviewing an actual hand history of and what we're doing is not reviewing the hand per se, but we're going through these sequential steps to try to actually get to the root of the problem. Okay, and step one is to describe the problem. That's your answer to the question of why.
Mhm.
Okay, step two is, why does it make sense that you would think, feel, or react that way? And this is a very important question to ask when you're dealing with tilt or any other emotional issue, because for many players, they feel like their reaction is irrational, illogical, wrong, right? And it's not, right? Everything happens in the mental game for logical and predictable reasons. The reason it feels illogical is because you don't yet know the reason. And the key word there is yet. So you got to do a little bit more discovery, uncovering, and figuring out why you actually think or feel that way. And then step three is to get to the flaw. Why is that logic flawed? And that's kind of the crux of the answer. So, the poker book, the trading book, they were designed for you to go through and figure out, okay, I'm dealing with injustice tilt. Here are some descriptions, different types of underlying flaws that exist. It's designed to help you fill out the mental hand history so you can get to the root of the issue. So, how are you going to actually avoid tilt? You got to understand it. And if you don't understand it, then your best bet at that point is just, pure mental distraction. And that's not really an answer.
Okay, that's fair. It's very, very. I think that's going to help Freddie DR87 with their question there. Crystals, CRSTALS. Thanks so much, Crystals, for submitting this one. Who are more challenging people to coach, pro athletes or pro poker players?
It's not about the environment. It's about like their makeup.
Hmm.
Poker players, by and large, like that have come to me are willing to do the work. And maybe it's because they read my poker book. Maybe it's just because, they know that they can't just like buy new clubs. It's a lot harder to practice, right? There's like fewer options to get better in poker than there are in golf. So yeah, I'd say on a whole, one of the reasons why I was excited to get into poker was because I was struggling to break through in golf. And the reason is because the industry as a whole makes people feel more overconfident than they are, makes them feel overconfident. And so as a result of that, they're a bit more kind of defiant and less willing to do the work. And that honestly has been true of even, PGA Tour players, kind of set in their ways, not really willing to do the necessary things to actually get that resolution. So if I were to say like kind of apples to apples, poker player to golfer, the poker players have been more fun to work with.
Okay. No, I don't know how many golfers are tuning into this one, but I don't know that they necessarily take offense to that, because that's kind of like a backhanded compliment in a way. They've got that ferocity a little bit more sometimes. Second question from Crystals. What do you recommend for amateur poker players to focus on to gain success?
I think you cut out for 1 second, so we just
Okay.
take
So
that
that's
one
the
again.
good. So it's second question from Crystals is, what do you recommend for amateur poker players to focus on to gain success? And I would sort of like even qualify this question as like, typically amateur players are certainly not putting as much time in the lab or something like that to get better like the pros are. So I suppose if your approach is going to remain amateur, what would you recommend that they focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's very simple to work on your own weaknesses. Like you tend to be able to know where you're making mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean that you know the mistakes that a better player would be able to see in your game. But, I would just continually identify where you make mistakes that are mistakes. It's like the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to kind of work on it. And I'm not saying this from a mental standpoint. I'm just saying it from a pure tactical standpoint. Know what they are, have them written down, and go, to the casino, go to play these games with the idea in your mind that your number one job is to avoid those mistakes. And if you do that, you're just going to play better. You're going to have something in your mind to kind of keep you more focused. So from a mental standpoint, there's value there. And then if you do make those mistakes again, don't be hard on yourself, right? Understand that you don't have the time to like very rapidly get rid of them. But, time after time, if you are more aware and more tuned in, it will be easier for you to learn more about how or why you're making that mistake. And sometimes there may be an emotional issue kind of attached to it, right? And that might be a simple next thing you could work on. So maybe you are making mistakes where you're more likely to make them when you're a little bit frustrated, or maybe when there's more money in the pot and a little bit of fear kind of kicks in, and that causes a small breakdown. So then you can kind of do a little bit of work on both sides. But by and large, if you're willing to do that work, it means that you care enough to want to get better. And if you are in CardsChat, you're not just there to play just because you love the game, right? You do want to get better. And I think those are two simple ways to get better.
Yep. Well put. We've got one final question here. We've always saved the most interesting or creative one for last. So, and your fair warning here, Jared, this one's a bit of a doozy from Acid Burn FX. Always asks some really interesting questions.
All right, bring it on me.
What last words would you like to share at the end of your existence?
I guess it would be to stay focused on resolution. I think if there was one thing that I accomplished in this lifetime, it's that. People have set their sights too low, in my opinion, and it's not that complicated to aspire towards actual problem solving of these mental and emotional issues, whether they're in the scope of poker, in trading, or in your personal life. Right? That when you take a problem solving approach, right, and not just a continual kind of management of your own issues, it's transformational, right? Like when you stop having those like knee-jerk reactions to have negative thoughts, or to react with fear, or to react with anger, or to lose confidence, or to, inflate your ego and get too kind of high on yourself. When you automatically don't have those reactions, you are freed up in ways that cannot be completely described until you're on that side. So, I think a lot of people in all walks of life, in all, both within the game and outside of it, kind of struggle with our own kind of emotional baggage. And it's a burden that does not have to be there. Right. So it's one of these things like, short-term pain, long-term benefit, or long-term pain, in smaller ways. Like when you're having to continually be undermined by this stuff over a long period of time, how much value is sucked out of your life? How much joy and happiness is sucked out of your life? How much, accomplishment and performance is sucked out of your game because you're not resolving your issues, your problems. So yeah, it's not complicated. It's hard in the short term. That is a fact. You have to work at it. The analogy that I give now is like chopping down a tree. At the beginning, you get a blunt axe and you are weak, right? But over time, as you understand the reason for why it occurs, the correction to that flawed logic, your axe gets sharper and you start wielding it in these key moments, and you get stronger over time, and eventually you can chop down that tree and reach resolution. You do not get a chainsaw here, right? So yeah, short-term pain, short-term hard work for massive long-term benefit that in some respects is kind of hard to really kind of comprehend. So yeah, my closing epitaph would be, resolve your shit.
Well, this last hour has been exceptionally enjoyable for me, and I'm sure for all of our listeners and people watching. But dare I say that if you had only tuned in for the last 3 or 4 minutes, it would have been worth it on its own. To everyone who sent in questions for Jared Tendler, just a friendly reminder that, here in the Cards Chat community, we give you the opportunity to do that, to engage directly with our guests. So if you want to submit your questions for future podcast guests, you can do so in the dedicated thread on the forums. And of course, we always ask, if you like the show, please be sure to give us a good review on iTunes and spread the word via your social media channels. Jared, before we let you go, anything else you'd like to tell our listeners?
No, listen, I'll say it one more time, do the work, enjoy yourselves. But yeah, just stay dedicated towards your own personal best. That's, I think, whatever level of the game you are at, when you stay motivated towards achieving your own personal greatness, great things happen. So yeah, and if people are interested in getting the poker book, obviously it's still available everywhere, audiobook, ebook, softcover, and the trading book is everywhere now. I think by the time this gets released, the audiobook may be out. It's uploaded and ready to be released at any moment. So it may be out by the time this podcast comes out. If not, it will be kind of imminent. But like I said, the poker book is still something that I'm very proud of. The trading book just kind of takes it a step farther.
And after listening to these dulcet tones for the last hour, who wouldn't want to hear you more on the audiobook as well? Jared, thank you again so much. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Cards Chat podcast. I'm Robbie Strazynski. You can follow me on Twitter at CardPlayerLife, and I wish you all a wonderful day.